Blue Spring, the gem of the St. Johns, is one of the many springs that flow into the St. Johns River. It is located in Volusia County, about 2 miles west of the city of Orange City. It's been occupied for over 2,000 years, first by the Mayaki Indians, who left their traces there with a shell mound that's on top of at the hill there at the spring. But the real artifacts that the Mayakans left was over on the Thursby Mound. Now, the Thursby Mound is not located at the spring. It's located up in the north part of the island of Hontoon. Actually, it's right across the river from the Hontoon Island State Park. C.B. Moore came down here in 1892 and searched the mounds in Volusia County and all up and down the St. Johns River for the artifacts, trying to date these mounds and to see how the Indians lived. When they started digging in the Thursby Mound, they found the biggest find of artifacts of animal effigies ever found in the United States up to that time in 1892. These are some pictures of some of the effigies that were found. They ran from 2 to 7 inches in length, and these are actual sizes that you're seeing here. They were only 12 inches below the surface, so they were probably in the later years of the Mayaki occupation of that area. And one of these pictures is actually what they called a beaver, but it looks as much like a manatee, probably as it did the beaver, so you can take your choice of whether it was a beaver or whether it actually was a manatee. Because a manatee is a West Indies species, but it could have very well lived then. The Seminole Indians came in after the Mayakas were died out or moved away from here or were killed off, and they occupied it for some few years. In the United States, when they took over Florida in the 1840s, this property was deeded to Sam Brown by President Polk. And he sold it in 1846 to Samuel Parsons, who was from Flushing, New York on Long Island. He was a horticulturist, had a big horticultural business there on the island of Long Island. One of the streets there is still named for him today. Now, he had brought his family down here every winter. He built a log cabin on the island, and he'd bring his family down here during the winter months, and he would study the flora and the fauna, and he'd take back portions of it that he thought he could put into his greenhouses up there and have it survive in the cold weather up there. In 1856, he sold the island, or not the island, but his portion of Blue Spring State Park today. But he sold that out, got rid of it, and Mr. Thursby, Louis Thursby, who was born in 1828 in Brooklyn, New York, bought it. Now, I don't know how Mr. Thursby found out about it, whether he found out about it up there or where he did, but he went off and fought in the Mexican Wars and came back. His health was very poor when he come back, and he needed to get out of the cold climate up there. He married a lady by the name of Mary Ann, and she was from Switzerland, and they moved on down to the spring there. He lived in this house for a while, and as you can see, he started planting orange trees in there. And this was what was supposed to be his money crop, because everybody that came to Florida back then came to plant oranges. That was they had orange fever, and that was where he was going to make his money. Supposedly, it was on oranges. Louis Thursby began to, after he planted his orange trees, he began to build some docks down on the river so he could accommodate the steamboats that were working the river back in those days. Now, in the early days, before, we don't know the exact date it was done, before the cut was made across where the Hontoon Island State Park is today, the river did not run. In 1854, the river ran down through Snake Creek and out and just south of Blue Spring. That is the reason that Volusia County has Hontoon Island in Volusia County, is because this was the river. When they made a dividing line in 1854, the river was a dividing line. Sometime after 1854 and before 1892, this cut was made across here. This little creek that ran up to the mouth of Beersford was opened up, straightened out, widened, and this cut made across this shell mound. Now, sometime in this same time period, the Thursbys bought the island. They own the island, and I don't know how much of this peninsula, but part of the peninsula up here. And they sold Mrs. Thursby later sold this to Pontoon Island to George Drika, who owned a department store in the land. And Mr. Drika would not let them look in the mound that lay right here. He made them. He told them no, they couldn't do it. So that but it did work the Thursby Mound, and that's where they found all these wonderful artifacts that's been found. Now, the steamboat would come up through here and around, and that was a terrible ordeal for them to get through Snake Creek. But they would come up to the springs, and they would leave their freight there, and then they'd proceed on up to Lake Beersford if they had enough stuff to haul up there. If they didn't have any passengers or made enough freight to come up there, just passengers, they would drop them off right here on the side of the river, and they would have to walk across here and scream and yell, holler, shoot a gun or something till Mr. Alexander, who had the store and all there at Beersford and the docks, they would roll down a rowboat and pick them up. So it was really a boon to the steamboaters and to the people along the river here when this cut was opened up. This was all intact. They did not have to do anything to this part of the river. Now, Mr. Thursby's docks produced a lot of revenue for the people coming there, and they established the first post office in 1866, and Mrs. Thursby here was the postmistress. And it operated there until 1876 when they moved it down into Orange City, which was started in 1874 by the Wisconsin Company. Now, Mr. Thursby realized that that little house that he was living in that Mr. Parsons had built on the mound would not go suffice for a growing family, which had already begun. And they tore it down, and they built this little old cabin here to live in while they were building his new house there. And this is the interior of it. Now, it's not much, but it would suffice for what their needs for that length of time that they had to live in it. And you notice the mosquito netting hanging out from over the beds. You could not sleep in this country without mosquito netting back then. There was no screens for windows, and the mosquitoes just flew in and out at will. So you had to get under mosquito netting at night to be able to sleep. It was awful hot in the summertime, but the bites of the mosquitoes was much worse than the heat. Now, Mr. Thursby completed his house in 1872, and this is what it looked like when he completed it. And it was a fine home that he had there, and it was going to take care of all the children they were going to have, 10 of them, 6 girls and 4 boys. And this is one of the children standing out in front of the house not too long after it was completed. And one of the children, which is Lewis, was the oldest boy. There was 6 girls and 4 boys. Lewis was the oldest, and he was up under the house playing, as the children will often do when they're in the summertime, especially on a rainy afternoon. They'd go up under the house to play. And he was up under there playing and got bit by a snake, probably a cottonmouth moccasin, and died from that. It was a great loss to the family to lose their son. And this is his youngest daughter, Belle. Belle said that in the 1880s that she could hardly sleep at night for the steamboats coming into the docks and the people working there and going on. It was just a constant trade of people and steamboats, and the railroad had come through up there then, and it was very difficult to even try to sleep at night. Belle later became a teacher and worked with the Department of Agriculture and Gainesville in the Home Economics Department. Now, the railroad came down. The first mechanized railroad in Volusia County ran from down at Mr. West's store in Orange City down to Blue Spring. That was in 1880 that railroad was put in. It was horse-drawn. We found a set of axles that went on the little car that the mule pulled, and they're still there at the park in Blue Spring. So you can still see those today. Mr. Plant came through there with the railroad from Jacksonville in 1887. At that time, right after that, he purchased the little railroad that Mr. West had, and in 1890, he built a railroad from Blue Spring, the river there, all the way across to the Halifax River in New Smyrna. He called it the Blue Spring, Orange City, Halifax Railroad, and it was later taken over by the Florida East Coast Railroad. And these are just, again, some pictures of the houses at different time in its history. This is a little later on, before about the time that the Thursby's was leaving the park. And notice the shell mound here has been cut down. This is built on the top of an Indian midden, but they'd use this shell they took out of here to shell the roads around the park and coming into it from from the Blue Spring. And the road at that time ran down what's Blue Springs Avenue today, and around and across the railroad track and into the park. They don't go that way today, and we'll talk about that a little more in a few minutes. And this picture is put in here to look at the house, to look at this water tank in the back. You wonder why they need a water tank when they got a spring out there that's pushing out 75,000 gallons of water a minute. Well, the reason they put it up there was because they had no way to pump the water from there up to the house. So the water drained off the roof and into the top of this tank, and then it came from there down into the house with enough pressure that you could have running water in the house, which was a real boon back in those days to have running water in the house. His only neighbors at that time were the ones around Enterprise. At the earliest days was around Enterprise and Frederick DeBerry, whose house had been completed 1 year earlier in 1871, and Mr. Stark to the north on the Stark property. He'd built a house there in 1854, about the time the county was formed. And those were his closest neighbors till they started developing the town of Orange City in 1874. Now, this is after the state has obtained the property. This is a house that's just been painted and cleaned all up, and that's a view from the riverside. And this is from the south side looking at the north side of the house. And you can see very well, you can see the mound it's sitting on. In the inside of the house, we have a lot of the original furnishings that the Thursbys had when they owned it. The nice piano, the bed, and again, notice the mosquito netting hanging over it, because again, you had to have it to be able to sleep at night. And in the kitchen, in the dining room, we have the original furnishings and the plate settings and the beautiful old chandelier that was hanging up there over the tables. We go into the kitchen. You see the old wood stove there, and the pot, the boiling pot here, and then some of the other cooking ware hanging on the walls there. And again, this stuff is original to the Thursby family. And Mr. Thursby's docks, as we talked about a little bit earlier there, were the main focal of his business. And you can see the first docks he put in out on the river there. And this is the very earliest dock I think he had that you can see in this nice pictures here and close-up of it. And Blue Spring Landing. This is the Emanuel family here down there. They've been down there for a picnic probably, and went out on the dock and had their picture taken on the dock. The Emanuels are a very old family in Volusia County, and there's a cemetery located south and west of Orange City that is the Emanuel Cemetery, which has a lot of other people buried in, but they donated the land for it. It's just some more pictures of the dock where the freight would come in. After the train came, they had to make little changes in it, and you see the gazebo here for this was for the passengers for the steamboat, and this is where they would gather, and the freight would be stored in this building because the train came right up to that, and they could load up. There was a turnaround for the train out just past where the present railroad track is, where this train could be turned around to head itself back, or to back down here to load its freight. These are some ladies standing out on the dock there. You can see the gazebo over here where they would wait for the train, for the steamboat, or the train, either one, I guess. And these ladies are out here getting ready to probably go up to Jacksonville to spend a couple of days up there shopping, which was very customary back in those days. Now, the big steamboats did not run on the river in the summertime because there wasn't enough traffic for them. There wasn't enough freight or passengers, so the smaller boats, this is the Okahumpke, and this boat actually was off of the Ocklawaha River, but it'd come in here in the summertime to bring passengers and things up to the river, along with some of the other smaller boats, until the city of Jacksonville and the bigger boats would come back from up north. They would send them up to the Long Island Sound and into the New England states to work in the summer months, and then they would come back down here and work in the winter. This is the Clyde Line scene. This is one of their advertisements. Clyde Line bought out the Merchants Line, who was composed of Frederick DeBerry and the Maya Line, They brought this out in the late 1880s, and they continued to run this until about 1933 was when the last passenger boats ran on the river. This is the Frederick de Berry going by French Avenue, which is laid just to the north side of the park. Now, when this is the Frederick Berry again at the docks. This boat was built in 1881, and its sister ship was the City of Jacksonville, built in 1882. And there it is at the docks. Notice that the old pilings of the older dock that we saw earlier. You can see all these old pilings there. Some of these pilings are still there in the river. Most of them have been pulled out since the state got it. That's the Osceola. That's the second biggest boat to ever operate on the river, built in 1913. And it was a stern wheeler. If you notice, the other boats, the other two boats were side wheelers. And there he is leaving the dock, headed north, down the river. There he is going past the French Avenue, and you notice the stern wheel working there in the boat. And in this, and also in this picture, you see it. And this is at French Avenue. So those people out there fishing. This is the mouth of the spring. Now, when Mr. Thurby bought this place, it did not include all of this whole area there. He did not own any land on the north side of this run. His land all lay on the south. It did not even go all the way up to the Boyle. It just went part of the way up there, and most of his land lay off to the south that he had there. And of course, he only paid $400 for the thing when he bought it. It was not a great price. Today it's worth immeasurable in price, but hopefully the state will have it from now on. And this is the mouth of the run going up there to the Boyle. This is about a half a mile approximately to get up to the Boyle from the river. This is just a close-up. Some people out there in the boats. A lot of people fish right there at the mouth of it. Also, Mr. Thursby built boathouses in there. The Thursby family did. They constructed these boathouses for the larger boats that people owned around this area could house them in there, because that fresh water, that spring flowing down there, they didn't generate moss and stuff growth on them like they did if you kept it out in the river itself. And this is another picture of it. And there's a close-up of it. And this is a dock here that was put in later years. There are the gas pumps on it for people to get gas for their boats. Notice the little boats over on the right. These are rental boats that Mr. Thursby rented, and the people that owned it later rented these same boats here. And then back in the 40s when I used to go there, they charged you 50 cents a day to use one of these boats all day. And you didn't have a motor for them, or we didn't. We all just had to row them everywhere we went. But we were glad to go down there. They always leaked. That was common with these Cypress boats. And but they always had a coffee can in there so you could bail it out and keep the water out of it. This is a picture of a houseboat coming up there, much later time period. But you can still see the rental boats that were there for them at that time. This picture here shows a big oak tree that used to sit right where this is a little stand where we'd go pay your money. You'd charge you 10 cents to get in there back in the 40s and the early 50s and the 30s. And you'd pay your money here. In later years, in the first years I used to go out there, there was a little place up where you came in up at the very beginning of the park up there. That little stand there, and you'd pay your money there. But later they just quit doing that, and you'd pay it down here. And they sold candy and other things in there in later years. And there's a little trailer there where the man that run the park, he lived in there. Now, Mr. Thursby sold this park in 1946 to Thursby family. Mr. Thursby actually died in about 1890. And Mrs. Thursby built a house up in Orange City in 1891, and she moved up there. And John Thursby, the youngest boy, he stayed there and ran the park, and he put in a dairy out there and had a dairy ran there up until, I guess, in the 1950s. He still had a dairy, and he had a small house just on where you came into the park, right almost opposite of where the dairy barns were at. And that's where he actually lived, and he lived there even after they sold the property. They sold it to Homer Smith in 1946, and Homer Smith at that time was a tax assessor for Volusia County. And they owned the park and operated it up until 1957 when they sold it to Gordon Pearson and his family. And Mr. Pearson and them operated it for a number of years, and they finally sold it in about 1966 to a company called Blue Springs Park Incorporated. They had to repossess it in 1970 and then resold it to the state of Florida in 1972. Now, the spring, as I told you, was not part of this property, and the spring had been owned by Mr. Marshall, who was a real estate man in Orange City. Mr. Marshall and some other people were going to put a pipeline from the Boyle there all the way to Cape Canaveral to furnish water to the Cape over there. And he had gotten some partners, and they had formed all this stuff to do all that. But the problem was, when they put an analysis on the water, there was so much salt in it they couldn't use it. So that didn't pan out. So he sold it to a company called Quail Hollow Incorporated. They put in trailer parks and the Blue Springs Incorporated. They actually put in a clubhouse, a swimming pool, and some other facilities on the property while they had it. And the state ended up also buying the Blue Spring property the Boyle property in 1972, and that completed their first purchases there. And you see some more of the little stands there and the trailer where the man lived at different times. And again, you see that beautiful big oak tree there, and that was hit by lightning and died. It burned quite a bit before it died, and the stump of it's still standing there today. We start down the run now with back in the 50s and 60s and all. Before the state got it, you could take a motor boat and you could go all the way up to the Boyle. They don't allow those in there today. A canoe is the only thing they allow to go up in the run today. And again, you can notice the boathouses in the background there. And this was a swimming hole. It was just past the boathouses. Just beyond the boathouses was a swimming hole at that time. Quite a bit of distance from where it is today. And this is notice the kids swinging out there on the rope to drop in the spring. Up in the background there's the bathhouses. You would go to the stand there and pay your dime, and they would give you a little basket, and you'd come down here and you'd change your clothes and put all your swim trunks on, and you'd take your clothes back up there, and they would sit them in there till you got ready to go, and you'd come and get them and go back down and change. But that was the bathhouses, and it was a fun place to go when I was a kid. I really enjoyed going there and playing in the spring. The water was 72 degrees, just like it is today, and it stays that way the year round. That's why the manatee come there. This is just some of the folks up there that would come out there swimming, and they would have a lot of picnics come. People come there on picnics, and these ladies, as you see there in their bathing suits, if you took one of those bathing suits today, you could probably get enough material out of it to make about 8 or 9 of the present-day bathing suits. But back in the early days there, before back in the 50s and 60s, before they had swimming pools around, people had any swimming pools, the city would have a Red Cross swimming classes there, and they would come out here to the springs, and that's what these kids are doing. They're learning the Red Cross recitation, also learning to swim. And this is one of the summer activities that the city of Orange City furnishes their citizens. And there's some of the people swimming. And notice again the big boathouse in the back. And this is one of the boats that just came up for the day or weekend at the spring there. We start on up the run now, and as we go along, we'll see the other side of the run, which is the north side. And that was all privately owned. There's still only one private piece of property up there. It's right on the river there on the corner. It's still privately owned. Everything else in there now is owned by the state of Florida, including the Stark property, which was purchased by the county when they first started the land saving for Volusia County to buying up of endangered land. The Stark property was their first purchase, I believe. I'm pretty sure of that. And they turned around and donated it to the state, and it's now part of the Blue Springs State Park. And they also bought land for more land to the south of the original park. Till the day their holdings there are 2,800 acres. And hopefully that some more of it will be developed for hiking and stuff in the near future. And we get up to the boil. Now, the boil, as I said, puts out 75,000 gallons of water a minute. It's 129 feet down to a big rock that blocks the mouth of the cave down below. One reason is to keep divers out of there because it gets pretty treacherous down below that, I understand. And there's been quite a few people drowned in this boil since they started doing diving in there. These are just some color postcards of the boil. It really was. These are all hand-painted cards. Now, these pictures were made in black and white. They were sent to Germany and hand-painted and then sent back in, sold for a penny. So that's why they look real false looking. But these are actual pictures now we're seeing here. Notice the steps going up the tree, and that's where the kid would climb up there and then jump into the boil off the tree. And this is again at a picnic. As you can see the ladies over there. And it's about the turn of the century. You can tell by their clothing. It's just another picture of the boil. Just notice the thick vegetation over there. This is after it burned off. You can see that this country burned, which it often did back in those days. That's why there were really no oak trees outside of the river area because the woods burned all the time. This is some people up on the boil there. Notice the water whirling there. You can see where it's coming up out of the ground there. And these some people in a colored postcard. And one thing these people would do when they were painting them, they would paint scenes into it that were not there really. These people were not in the original picture. They were painted in to make it more attractive to you, so you would buy it. Now these ladies are daredevils standing out there on that log out over the run there. But notice that again, we're around the turn of the century. This is another picnic group out on the spring there, or the run. And this is again in the turn of the century type. This is the Sunday school class from Orange City down there for a picnic on Sunday afternoon. There's a lot of big bass on the river back in those days, and you see these here. This is my father, Bill Draggers, Senior, holding these fish. You can see the big bass he's got there. These two will probably weigh somewhere in the neighborhood of 12, 13 pounds, and the other two will go around 10 pounds or so. This is a dredge boat called the Venter. Now, the Venter came down there in the late 1930s and cut out all those ox bows that we saw in there earlier up and down the river there, because there was a lot of time spent going around those sharp bends of those steamboats, and they made those cuts across the river, not up just there, but all up and down the river. And they came back after the Second World War and proceeded to do that up north of Highway 44 and cut out a lot of the curves up through there and then straightened the river out terrifically from what it was in the very earliest days of its existence. As I told you, the old road actually used to come around by Blue Springs Avenue. Well, French Avenue was the shortest way there, but the railroad was way down below, so they built this trestle across there. They're up on top of the trestle getting ready to thinking about figuring out how to go floor it. That's Mr. Strickland there Harley Strickland on the left, and Gordon Pearson, who owned the springs at that time, on the right, and his children, I assume. And this would be a great change in the pattern to get in there and keep people from having to cross that railroad track with automobile. You're looking east from the trestle end on French Avenue towards Orange City in this picture. Now you notice even the people that live there spell the thing wrong. There's an S on the end of it, and Blue Spring does not have an S on it because there is only one spring there. So it's just Blue Spring. The state, when they first got it, they spelled it wrong, and then they had to change all their signs. This is down at the boil. Now that after the state has taken it over, you can see the observation tower up here, and this was they swam a lot in there then. They don't do too much swimming up there anymore. They have a regular swimming area for them down below. But this was where the manatee would come to. The manatee today is a big thing. Jacques Cousteau came there in 1972 and made a film about them. And this was what changed the springs description, I guess I should say, of what it was. It became from a swimming place and picnic ground to a place where people come to observe the manatee. They're very, very plentiful here. In fact, in 1996, they had 95 of them in there, which is the largest group they've ever had. On the west coast, Crystal River is the place they come in there. So the manatee found this to be the best place. This is the only spring on the St.Johns River that they come to in any quantity. And this is now the home of the manatee. And it's in the wintertime, people come here literally by the thousands to see the manatee in there. You go out on those observation platforms on a cold day and you'll see them. They're just lined up in the bottom of that run. There's so many of them in there to escape the colder water out of the river, because this stays at a constant 72 degrees. Today they've made a lot of underwater pictures of them. Some of them have been hit by boats and caught in pieces of nets and stuff, and have been taken out and carried down to the Sea World and nursed back to health and brought back and put back in the river here. They've been radios put on to monitor where they go and what they do, and they leave here mostly in the summertime. There are very few of them. Once in a while in the summertime you'll see one on the river, but they mostly head out into the ocean and go on their way wherever manatee go to in the summertime. Now, when I was a kid growing up and going down there with my dad to work on boats, I never saw a manatee in there in my life. Catfish came in there by the thousands in the spring of the year. The run would be black with them. And they'd come in pods, and whatever the size of that pod, the fish in that pod, they were all the same size. If they were 6 inches long or 18 inches long, they were still all the same size in the group that came in. Mr. Smith on it, his son said that he saw 2 manatee in there during the time they owned it. And the Pearsons never saw very many in there when they owned it. But now they come in there by the groups, and last year, 96, was the most they'd ever had. They had 95 manatee in there that year, different ones. And that's a lot of manatee. And the manatee come there because the water's a constant 72 degrees, and the river gets much colder than that, so they come up to be in the warm water. And the manatee is a threatened mammal. It's a West Indies mammal. It's not native to the area, but back in the old days, when my father and I'd be on the river fishing, we'd see one once in a while, and we called it a sea cow, because it's very much like a cow. And they would, back in the earlier days than that, but they could catch one in shallow water, and they would kill it and dress it out and eat it just like they would a cow or anything else that was, edible like that. It was a source of food that was used when they had an opportunity to get it. Today they're very strict on the manatee, and anything, you can't disturb them, harm them, or harass them or do anything with them. I sit and wonder today what the future holds for Blue Springs and the manatee. And the reason I say that is that the increase in population is demanding more water, and our underwater reservoirs, the aquifer, is slowly going down, and it's not being able to replenish itself fast enough to take care of the amount of population we have here, which will, I don't know how it will change this spring, or if it will change it, or what the fate of the manatee will be as the increased recreation demands on the river and the springs all over the state, not just on the St. Johns, increases. The more people we get, the more people that want to be on the water, and more people that want to have recreation facilities for their pleasures. And we have to wonder where we'll be in the next century.
International Non-Theatrical Events has awarded